Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. The Club 21 was located at 21 Olive Street, that's how it got its name, which was right near the intersection of Power Street on a very grimy block in East Williamsburg. It was filled with working class, wooden frame homes. And it was kind of, down at, it was a good neighborhood. It was a strong neighborhood, but it was cosmetically, it wasn't anything to brag about. And in the early 1960s, social clubs proliferated all over New York City and in large part all over New York State in different towns, Buffalo and Schenectady and Albany, etc. Because under New York State law, a private club could get a charter. And a private club meaning it could be a fraternal organization like the Elks. It could be a political club, a Republican Democratic club. It could be a patriotic organization like the American Legion or the Veteran of Foreign Wars. There were ethnic organizations like the Sons of Napoli or the Ancient Order of Hibernians. And the most famous one, of course, later on in years, was the Ravenite Social Club, which was the headquarters of John Gotti down in Little Italy. But they were all over the place. And under the law, they were popular because under the law, if you had a charter for your social club, you could serve the members alcoholic beverages. You couldn't sell the alcohol, but you could serve it free to the members. They could consume alcohol, beer, wine, booze, whatever. And that was an attraction for people for all those different organizations. And what we used to do at Club 21 and the clubs like ours, some of the social clubs, was on social nights, they would sell tickets. We would get a roll of theater tickets and they would sell them, let's say at that time, they were $2 a ticket, and it would be 3 for $5. And one of the members would go quietly circulate around to the people in the club and sell the tickets. And then you could use the tickets at the bar. So there was no cash going over the bar. All you do is you order a drink, and whatever it was, you gave a ticket. And all the drinks were the same price. And so that was a fundraising thing and helped pay the bills, the electric and the rent, et cetera, et cetera. And all the clubs used to do that. And some of the clubs were really big. Club 21 was not. It was actually small. It was just a storefront. But I had a cousin. My cousin Pete had a club in my old neighborhood of South Brooklyn called Club Impala. And they had a ballroom. And on Friday and Saturday nights, there was a full-out, there was jukebox playing, but there was a full-out Latin orchestra. Like Tito Puente, who had like 20 pieces, Machito, Mongo Santa Maria, Johnny Pacheco, you name it, they were all there, Tito Rodriguez. All the big bands would play, and the crowds would be enormous. And there was a lot of money going around, and everybody, of course, was exchanging tickets for their drinks. And that club, Impala, had an annual dinner dance in another neighborhood in Brooklyn, an Orthodox Jewish community called Borough Park. On 14th Avenue, there was, and 42nd Street, there was a big temple called the Menorah Temple, and they had a ballroom that was the equal of any hotel ballroom in Manhattan. And we used to have our annual, my cousin would have his annual dance there, and that was a big fundraiser too. Well, back to Club 21. I was introduced there by my college friend, Joe Feraldo, who later became my law partner when I first became a lawyer. And Joe Feraldo, everybody in Brooklyn has a nickname. In fact, nicknames are the regular course of business in Brooklyn. Many times, most people don't even know people's real names. They know them only by their nicknames. And Joe Feraldo was called the Martian when he was a little kid because his head was outsized for his body. And they called him the Martian. And then they called him Joe Marsh. Later on, he graduated to be called Joe Marsh. My name, Rudy, my nickname from South Brooklyn and it carried over to Williamsburg in North Brooklyn was Kazootie because I was named after a puppet. There was a famous TV puppet show called Rudy Kazootie, and his little girlfriend, the puppet, was Polka Dottie, and his arch nemesis was Poison Zumac. And so Rudy and Kazootie, and that's it. It stuck. So that was my nickname. But everyone in Brooklyn had a nickname, and some of the more elite members of Club 21, for instance, were Ralphie Pigeon, Benny Blood. Then there was a couple, they were inseparable. Mark Anthony and Cleopatra, Nestor Patu, Denise Doobie Doo, because there was a popular song called Oh Denise Doobie Doo, I'm in love with you. And they called her Denise Doobie Doo. And Tommy Whale, because Tommy Whale drove a truck a fuel oil delivery truck, a tank truck for whale oil, and that distinguished him from Tom the Animal, who could consume prodigious amounts of food. His mother would make him a cauldron of macaroni on Sunday by himself, and he'd eat the whole thing. And one of the other members was Frankie Corpse, who got his name, the Corpse, because after a few drinks he would lay down on the couch, fall asleep, and cross his arms, his palms on his chest, very much just like a corpse in a funeral parlor. And somebody would come along, some wag would come along and stick a flower between his hands, and he got the name Corpse. And he even referred to himself as Corpse. I remember I went into the restroom, and there was Frank staring at himself in the mirror, combing his hair. And he said to himself, he's speaking to himself, he said, looking at himself, and he goes, Corpse, 26 years old, and you still got it. And I said, oh my God, this guy calls himself Corpse, and he's really, at 26 years old, he was proud of the fact that he still had it. And he was a pretty good looking guy. And there were a couple of bookmakers, they were partners, and their name was Gong and Moon. I don't know why, but that was them. The club was open all week, but it was quiet. Guys would just come in, turn on the ball game, watch the Mets or the Yankees. The jukebox would be working. The jukebox had all kinds of music, pop, rock, Latin. The Beatles came, doo-wop, and then came the Beatles. That was quite different. Nobody knew what they were at first, but they caught on very well. And in fact, people started changing their hairstyles around 1964 to an imitation of the Beatles. And they made an impression. And then there was the usual Italian-American characters on the jukebox, like Jerry Vale or Jimmy Roselli and Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Louis Prima, that sort of stuff. So all week long, the place was pretty quiet. It was furnished very modestly. There were a couple of throwaway couches in there and some chairs. We had a couple of folding chairs that we kept in case we needed them. And there was a bar, and there was a toilet. And the place was clean. It was always clean. Everybody kept it very, very. They looked after it, and it was always kept well kept. It was never sloppy or dirty or anything like that. It was always kept, and it was a nice place to hang out. But the big time of the week was always Friday and Saturday nights when we would have socials, which meant the door would open to girls, and the girls would come. This is like a singles scene of the 1960s, and in those days, nightlife started around 8 p.m. Eventually, over the years and the decades, it got later and later, and now they come out starting at midnight, I guess. But in those days, people showed up around 8, 8:30, and the whole thing went on. The jukebox would be playing, and there'd be dancing, and then guys would meet girls. And we had girls from all over the place. We had girls from faraway parts of South Brooklyn or the exotic Bronx or Queens, and we even had other neighborhoods. And even once a month, I remember we had a group of girls, about 4 or 5, and we used to drive down from New Britain, Connecticut. That's up near Hartford. And they would come to Brooklyn and socialize. I think they stayed over and stayed in the city for whatever and made a weekend out of it. But it was a lot of fun. It was all good. And we never had trouble in the club. I mean, if there was ever an altercation, it was among friends, and it was easy, to settle. It never got to be anything. It was always peaceful. It was a nice respite from the rest of the world. Well, when the club closed on the social nights on Fridays and Saturdays, it would close when the crowd finally thinned out, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3:30, whatever it was, depending on the crowd. We would, the members would go, we'd pile in a few cars, 2 or 3 cars, and go out to eat, because we were all young people, and you could eat at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and get up and go to work the next day or whatever you had to do. When you're young, you can do that. We did that. And once in a while, we'd go to a local diner nearby Elmhurst, Queens, or on Queens Boulevard. But mostly, we would just drive over the Williamsburg Bridge and go to the famous Katz's Delicatessen on the Lower East Side, or Chinatown. And we would alternate. Katz was famous for for pastrami and salami, send a salami to your boy in the army, that sort of thing. And they still are very, very famous. It's a big tourist attraction. But they also had the most abusive waiters in the world. And what was really funny is these waiters, we would abuse them. It wasn't nasty. We never pushed anybody around or violent or anything like that. But we would give them the business the same way they gave us the business, and to the point where it became sport. And some of them would avoid us, not to be able to, not to want to deal with us, the kidding around and the hard times that we would give them. Chinatown was another story. We go to the same restaurants all the time, and every time we go there, the waiters were anxious to see the end of the dinner, because there would be 15 guys sitting at a table, and Tom the Animal, true to his name, would walk around to each guy and say, basically, and look at their plate with unfinished meals and say, "Cuz, are you going to finish that?" And if not, he would grab it and finish it. And that was a wonder. And the real pinnacle of the show was at the very end, when having no more food to eat, he would get the spare rib bones and start chewing those. And the Chinese guys were really excited to see him chew up the spare rib bones. I mean, it was a real attraction. They would get all excited and start jabbering away in Cantonese or Mandarin, whatever. And they couldn't believe how this guy could actually chew up the bones, but he could. Well, right up the block from Club 21 was St. Catherine's Hospital and Nursing School. And I had a girlfriend, Dolores, and she was in the nursing school. And the nursing school had a 9 p.m. curfew. And in the residence, it was on Olive Street, Olive and Judge, right across from my friend Joe Feraldo's house. And I would stay by the fence, and Dolores would be up on the fourth floor, and we would have conversations on summer nights. And out of Joe Feraldo's house would come his father, Big Zero. We call him Big Zero. He was only 5'5", but he was 5'5" high and 5'5" wide. He operated a scrap iron business. He was a wonderful, wonderful man, strong as an ox. And he used to come out and tease me all the time. And while I was talking to Dolores, he'd say, "Kazuti, we're going to buy you a mandolin so you can serenade your girlfriend. Stop the talking, start singing." And we would have a couple of laughs. And one of his famous quotes, he was a very wise man, and one of his famous quotes, among many, was asking people, "Do you know what the number one disease in the whole world is? It's a plague." And we say, "No, cancer, no. Jerkolitis." He says, "It's everywhere. People have jerkolitis, and they're all over the place. You can't stop them." He says, "They're everywhere." Well, the whole Brooklyn of my youth was a tough place in many respects, and it wasn't very fancy, but it was a colorful and unbeatably funny place to be. And, there was not a computer in sight. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.